Hello and welcome to this episode of T-Tech. On today's episode, we're going to talk about hypervisor network connections so VMs can talk through them and basically get to the physical network. So what we have for this is we are going to have a host, and that host is going to run a Type 2 hypervisor. This is a software program in userland, so something like VirtualBox or VMware Player would be examples of this. Something like VMware ESXi or Proxmox are Type 1. That's something separate. But they can run on many operating systems, including Windows, Linux, Mac, and any of the BSDs. But what we're doing to make virtual networks for them, virtual interfaces, is we're using our operating system's network stack. So in the kernel of the operating system, it has a network stack, and in this case, we have a lot of interfaces we can choose from to use, depending on the operating system, of course. You got a bridge, you got a tunnel, you got a tap interface, you got a loopback interface. Pretty much the main idea about all of these interfaces, they're in software, and they're not a physical NIC, all right? So they're not like your Wi-Fi connection or your Ethernet connection. They're different than that. They're just in the network stack. Now, in this case, what usually happens is if I choose to make a ton interface in this example, I would create ton 0, and I would give it an IP address and whatever subnet mask I want. It's an interface, and it has a network assigned to it. So that also means it will have a routing table entry. Once we've done that, we go into our hypervisor and assign the virtual NIC 1 here another IP address that is on the same subnet that we assigned on our host running the hypervisor. All right. So when we do that, this will mean the VM and the host reside on the same broadcast domain or IP network. So because they do, though, they can send packets back and forth. Pretty much any protocol that the network stack has, that the OS supports, can be sent back and forth. So once that's configured, you can pretty much communicate with anything. And as we'll see, we can test other things as well. So now you can also take it a step further, and if you want to add more than one network interface, you would have like ton 0 here, and then that could go into the first virtual NIC for it. The same concept happens though, and you could have a second one bridged to a physical NIC on your host, and that would go out to the internet. So here we're doing the same thing, but in this case, if we had a router or firewall set up, something like IPFire or something like that, we can configure that as a router, and the virtual NICs just get routed at layer 3 like they would any other time. So ton 0 would still be there. It would connect to the LAN side of the VM, and then the second virtual NIC, as we're showing, VNIC 2, that maps to the host's physical NIC. So in other words, that goes out to the physical network. You could even do something like ExpressVPN on the host running the hypervisor, and then you can route the traffic from the VM over that. But the idea is these interfaces provide communication between the hypervisor and the virtual machine. So next, we're going to look at how to create these on Linux and on Windows. So I will see you in a second. Alright, so on Linux here, I'm going to show you how to make the interfaces we talked about previously. We're going to focus on the bridge ones and the tunnel ones. So you want to open up a terminal. First of all, for both of these, you want to make sure you install bridge utils. I'm on Linux Mint. If you're on Red Hat, type your appropriate command there. So we installed that already. And the other one you'll want to install is called utilities. That was for the tunnel ones. We're going to go ahead with sudo brctl, add br0. Then I'm going to assign it an IP address. All right. Now if I look in the routing table, it should be there. And it is BR0, and then it has that subnet and everything. So from there, we can open up VirtualBox. And we're going to go ahead and make another virtual machine. And it's going to be just test. It doesn't really matter what the name is. And just create it with the basic settings. Under settings of this though, let's go under network. And under attached to, make sure it's bridged. And then make sure you have BR0 on here. And if we hit OK, we should be able to see that under adapters, our first virtual NIC is BR0. Now, you can do this either way, but I'll show you how to assign another one with a different type of interface. So if I instead, and to avoid an IP conflict, I'll just take that address off BR0. So it should be out of the routing table. We'll do tonctl-t, ton0, and then we'll assign an IP. It can be on another subnet, as we talked about with the routing and stuff. But once we assign that and double check it, it's in there with ton0 as its subnet and everything. And we're going to go to VirtualBox. And now if we go to settings, we can actually add. We can do one of two things. We can switch it to ton0 on the existing, or we can go over and add a second adapter. We could have another adapter on. So one can be bridged to BR0, one can be bridged to ton0. We could have a third one bridged, as we talked about, to the physical Wi-Fi card in this laptop. So then when we hit OK, we can have 3 virtual NICs being presented. But that's how we make bridge interfaces and tunnel interfaces if you're using Linux with VirtualBox. But any Type 2 hypervisor is very similar. So that's how we do it in Linux. All right, so on Windows, how we implement this is you want to go to the Charms menu or just type Device Manager. You want to go to Device Manager and make sure you don't have any items selected. And then we want to go to Action, Add Legacy Hardware, hit Next. We want to select it from a list. And then we want to select Network Adapters. Then you want to make sure under Manufacturer you select Microsoft. Then down under here, we want to select KM Test Loopback Adapter. And then we want to install this real quick and hit Finish. And now, under the network connections, we're going to go to Advanced Network Settings. And under the Test Loopback Adapter you'll find now, we want to go to Additional Properties. And then instead of DHCP, now you can use DHCP if you have a DHCP server in the VM, but we don't in this case. So we're going to say manual, IPv4 we're going to turn on, and then we'll set up that IP from the diagram. Now you can set the gateway to be the VM if you want it to be a router. You don't have to though. We will just, in this case, we'll have that set just to show that it can be. And of course you can set DNS. And appears that you need to set DNS. All right. And once we pull up a command prompt, we should be able to see that that is in the routing table now. And it actually changed our default route to 10.1. Now remember, 10.1 would be assigned to the VNIC inside of the VM, that LAN interface, if we use it for that, if we use it to route through. You don't have to, though, as we've showed. You can use it for servers as well. And there's our route here and the interface. So, right here. So it's in the routing table. Now all we have to do is open up VirtualBox. We're going to hit New, set up our, doesn't really matter if it's a Linux VM or not. It doesn't have to be. And the only real thing you have to change is the settings on the network tab. So under network, we're going to, instead of that, we're going to do bridge adapter. We're going to bridge it to the test loopback adapter we created. And if you wanted to, you can make multiple loopback adapters, just like we did in Linux. And if there was another one here, we can choose it, or we can choose the physical NIC. And that will get it out to the real network. But with that, we hit OK. We can see both of our vNICs are going to be shown to the VM. So that is how you do it in Windows as well. And again, with many Type 2 hypervisors, this concept is very similar. With all that, I would like to thank you for viewing. I hope you found this video helpful and informative. And as always, it's been Tyler with T-Tech.